What's up guys, it's Aaronitmar. Today we are here talking about a brand new Famitsu article that Sakurai has published. This one is pretty interesting because now that the game is out and we're not really waiting for week-to-week news on Smash Ultimate, and he doesn't really have to recap any kind of a direct, this time he is talking about online mode, the victory rates, and the character usage, which is really interesting. Sakurai starts out by saying that you can learn quite a bit from the data of the online mode, and fundamentally and usually they will keep that kind of thing to themselves and they won't really reveal it, but this time Nintendo gave him permission to publish it in the Famitsu column. Now he's obviously not going to post a full chart of every single character and their win rates and things like that, but he is at least allowed to now talk about it, which was something that he normally wouldn't be allowed to do. He also gives a bit of a disclaimer that this data only refers to a single week between December 30th and January 5th, but the way that statistics works, this kind of can give us an average. Obviously, it will vary a little bit from week to week, but this gives us a very good idea. So first, he talks about one-on-one victory rates, and he says that there is not a single fighter that is lower than a 40% win rate, and there isn't a single fighter that is higher than a 60% win rate. So, average, that's about a 50% average, which is kind of what you'd expect. You expect half of the matches to be wins and half to be losses. As far as elite one-on-one matches, he says that the character with the lowest win rate sits at 43.7%, while the character with the highest win rate is at 56.8%. Again, that's kind of where you would expect them to be. And he says that while there is quite a considerable difference, there's a 13-point difference between the lowest win rate and the highest win rate, that is across 74 fighters, so that's actually pretty close when you consider all of the fighters together. Obviously, when you look at the highest versus the lowest, it's going to seem much more substantial, but when you pepper in all kinds of win rates in the middle of those, it seems pretty decent. He says that because Elite Smash is a record of the higher skilled players, it's going to still be kind of limited by the player's skill. So just because a character has a lower win rate than another character doesn't necessarily mean that that character is worse than the higher win rate character. There are a ton of factors to take into account. The player base, the number of matches played, the actual skill of the players like Sakurai says. Like, let's say we give skill a pretend number. The average skill of the Captain Falcon player base may be lower than the average skill of the Palutena player base, for example. That doesn't necessarily mean that Palutena is better than Captain Falcon, it simply means that the player base is a higher skill player base than the Captain Falcon player base. Even taking into account one-on-one matches that are outside of Elite Smash, Sakurai says that every single fighter has a win rate of somewhere between 40 and 54%. And that 90% of the total roster has at least a 45% win rate, which means there's roughly 7, 8, or 9 characters that have less than a 45% win rate, but it's still higher than a 40% win rate. Sakurai then kind of calls out the community, but not really, he's kind of just comparing. He says that those records are unique because they are completely free of bias. Online, you can see player-created estimations of a character's strength, or a tier list, and in reality, those differ pretty greatly from their actual records. Some characters online that tend to be given a lower rank actually end up coming very close to surpassing even the highest ranked characters. He says that this isn't unique to Ultimate either, and that even in previous entries of the series, this was the case. He then specifically calls out King K. Rool, which I think is very interesting. He said that there was a survey in Nico Nico, and that the consensus for King K. Rool was that he was a very strong character. But according to their actual stats, that doesn't end up seeming to be the case. Overall, he has a victory rate of 51.9%, and Elite Smash it was only 48.9%, which is actually about where you want a character to be, like I said before. 50% is pretty much right on the money. There seems to be a general consensus that King K. Rool is strong, but he imagines that there are also people that think no fair when they lose to King K. Rool. Looking at the records, he says he doesn't really see any need to adjust him, which tells us a couple things about Sakurai's balance philosophy. He doesn't see a character as strong being the reason that they need to be nerfed. He doesn't see community outcry as the reason they need to be nerfed. He specifically, according to this article anyway, is looking at the actual raw data. If he sees a character is climbing up to 75%, 80%, 90% win rates, then obviously he would take some kind of balancing measure. But he compared the data to what he heard people were saying, and he saw that there was really no truth to what they were saying, and it was just kind of bias on their end. King K. Rool may seem like a strong character, but when you compare it to the data, he really only wins 50% of the time. But then he does say that there are people that might continue to be stressed about fighting King K. Rool if he doesn't touch him, so he'll have to wait to hear what the adjustment team says, which is also good because it means that Sakurai himself isn't in charge of the entire balancing. It's all on an adjustment team, and I guess Sakurai is like sort of the last line of defense when it comes to that. Which lines up with what he said before the game came out, and he said that he didn't stress himself with worrying about balancing the game before it came out. He had a whole team dedicated to that. So it's nice that they are still in effect and they are still working and balancing the game separate from Sakurai. He then moves on to talk about actual character usage, and I guess this is talking about how many players are using each character. He said that the difference between the minimum and maximum fighter was about 20-fold, which is quite a lot. Overall, the most used character online was Cloud, but in terms of Elite Smash, it was actually Ganondorf. But despite Ganondorf being the most played character, his win rate is only about 47.9%, which is actually on the lower end. Next, he brings up an interesting point about Echo Fighters. He says that Peach and Daisy are the most similar of all the Echo Fighters, but that being said, you'd think that they would have about the same win rate. In Elite Smash though, Peach has a win rate of 54.4% and Daisy only has 50.9%. So you'd expect them to have about the same win rate, but because there's a whole host of factors that apply to looking at the raw data, including player skill, the number of players who are actually playing the character, all sorts of things like that, it ends up having a huge margin of error. He says that this win rate difference could come from some kind of a calculation error, and that's why making adjustments is so difficult, because it's really hard to account based on just this data why a character is better than another character, particularly when those two characters are the exact same. It might seem easy when you're comparing, say, Ganondorf to Chrom, and you might be able to see a higher win rate and think in your mind, oh, well that means that one character is better than the other. But when Peach and Daisy have a different win rate, you would think that because Peach's is higher, Peach is a better character. But Peach and Daisy are literally the same, so that's why balancing is such an issue and you have to look beyond just pure win rates. Looking at the data, he says that it's pretty fair to say that no fighter is too overpowered or underpowered, and they are all kind of within range of each other. A lower win rate character can still beat a higher win rate character because player skill is a huge factor. And finally, he concludes by saying that he doesn't want to be too careless or too rough when he's balancing the cast. He wants to be absolutely sure and have a careful look at things as they currently are before making huge adjustments. Which I think is good because he's taking the job of balancing the cast very, very seriously. He has a whole team helping him, and he's making sure that he doesn't just willy-nilly nerf things. And I think that's particularly important because we just had a patch drop, which means that we had a whole host of changes, but we can be sure that those changes weren't added lightly. They weren't just thrown in there like, oh yeah, just go ahead and change Mario, go ahead and change Mii Brawler. They were very carefully analyzed, and they made sure that every change they were making was something that needed to be changed. But that, guys, is everything that Sakurai talked about in this Famitsu column. I always find these little articles that he makes really, really interesting because it gives us a really good insight into how his mind works. I think a lot of us kind of get caught up in the whole meme of Sakurai wanting to ruin Smash competitively and making it the most casual game that he can. And while it might end up that way, it's not like he has hate in his heart. He just thinks that things need to be adjusted because they're less fun for other players. And, you know, there's that whole meme of like, oh, better not win a tournament while Sakurai is in attendance because otherwise your character will get nerfed. But I don't necessarily think that's the case. Of course, he probably wouldn't outright say it even if it was the case, but I mean, based on this article, it really seems like he looks at results, he looks at things that might actually be broken, he looks at the whole picture and sees what the actual situation is before he jumps in and actually starts nerfing things willy-nilly. I mean, he says several times in this article that he doesn't want to patch things willy-nilly, carelessly. He wants to take his time. He wants to be sure that what he's changing truly needs to be changed, and he wants to look at the greater picture when it comes to actually making these changes. So yeah, I don't think we should really be too worried about him over-nerfing characters or anything like that, especially because he has a whole team behind him, so he's not personally making all of those decisions. But yeah, outside of that, this was a really interesting insight into the win rates of characters, which is pretty much private knowledge because we can't exactly see that. As a player, we can't really see that from the game end, so it's very interesting to get a little bit of an insight into that. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button. If you are new, be sure to subscribe. As always, I will leave the source for the translation down in the description. Big shoutouts to them, and if you want to peruse that and read it for yourself, the link will be there. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys next time. Peace out and have an awesome day.